The sound of tires screeching filled the air as I slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding a collision. My heart pounded like a war drum, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I stared ahead at the frail figure in the wheelchair, stranded on the side of the highway in the middle of nowhere. The old man's wrinkled hand waved weakly, a look of desperation etched on his face. I glanced at the clock. I was already late picking up my daughter, Emily, from school. Every second wasted here would mean another phone call from her teacher, another judgmental look from the parents who whispered behind my back. But leaving the man there? In good conscience, I couldn't do it. I rolled down the window. "Are you okay, sir? Do you need help?" His voice was weak but steady. My chair's motor stopped working. Can you give me a lift to town?" The hesitation was brief, but it weighed on me. My rusted sedan barely had room for my own things, let alone a wheelchair and an elderly man. But his tired eyes, filled with silent pleading, left me no choice. "All right," I said, hopping out of the car. "Let's get you in." The struggle to lift him and the chair into my car was exhausting. My arms ached, but I didn't complain. Once he was settled in the passenger seat, he gave me a faint smile. "Thank you, miss. You've got a kind heart." I nodded, trying to focus on the road. "Where to?" "Just the main square," he said softly. "My son will find me there." "Your son? Why didn't you call him for help?" I asked, genuinely curious. "He's a busy man," the old man replied, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Shame, maybe, or regret. "But he'll come." The drive was quiet, but not in an uncomfortable way. There was something calming about his presence, like he carried the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes. As we reached the square, he asked me to stop by a small cafe. "Would you join me for a coffee?" he asked, his frail hand reaching into his pocket. "Oh, I couldn't. I've got my daughter waiting." "Please," he interrupted, his voice almost pleading. "It would mean the world to me." Reluctantly, I agreed, helping him inside. The barista greeted him warmly, addressing him as Mr. Grant, which struck me as odd. He didn't seem like someone who commanded that kind of respect. But who was I to judge? As we sat, sipping coffee, he asked me questions about my life, my struggles as a single mother, my job as a waitress barely paying the bills, my dreams that felt so out of reach. He listened with an intensity that no one ever had before, his eyes filled with empathy. When we finally said goodbye, I felt lighter somehow, like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted. I helped him back into the car and drove him to his destination, a sprawling estate just outside town that made my jaw drop. The gates opened as we approached, and I couldn't help but gape at the sheer opulence of the place. "This is your home?" I asked, stunned. He smiled faintly. "It belongs to my son." Before I could ask more, the gates closed behind me, and a uniformed staff member helped him out of the car. I watched as he disappeared inside, my mind racing. Who was this man? Later that evening, as I tucked Emily into bed, there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped. Who could be visiting at this hour? I opened it cautiously, only to find a sharply dressed man with a briefcase standing on my porch. "Good evening," he said with a professional smile. "I'm Mr. Grant's attorney. He asked me to deliver something to you." I froze in the doorway, staring at the lawyer. My mind was racing. What could Mr. Grant possibly want from me? We'd only just met a few hours ago. What is this about?" I asked hesitantly, clutching the doorframe as if it could steady the whirlwind of emotions swirling in my chest. The man opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Mr. Grant instructed me to deliver this to you personally. He said you'd understand once you read it." I took the envelope with trembling hands, my heart thundering as I broke the seal. Inside was a neatly folded letter and a small golden key. My eyes darted over the words, and with each line, my disbelief grew. "Dear Miss Taylor, our encounter today was no coincidence. I believe fate brought us together, and I cannot ignore the kindness you showed me, a complete stranger. You shared your struggles with me openly, without realizing who I was or what I could offer. That kind of selflessness is rare. This key opens a property I've recently purchased in your name. It's modest compared to my estate, but it is a home, a fresh start for you and your daughter. I've also set up a trust fund for Emily's education. She deserves every opportunity to chase her dreams. Consider this my way of saying thank you for reminding me of the goodness that still exists in this world. My son and I have been estranged for years, and your compassion today has inspired me to mend those bridges. I only hope this gesture can give you a fraction of the hope you've given me. With gratitude, Walter Grant. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My legs felt like they might give out as I sank onto the couch, clutching the letter and key like lifelines. This can't be real, I whispered, staring up at the lawyer, who stood patiently, his expression calm but knowing. Why would he do this for me? Mr. Grant was deeply moved by your kindness, he explained. He's a man who values actions over words. And today, you demonstrated the kind of heart he admires. Tears blurred my vision. For so long, I'd felt invisible, forgotten by the world. And now, a simple act of kindness had changed everything. What about him? Is he okay? I asked, my voice shaky. He seemed so lonely. The lawyer hesitated for a moment. Mr. Grant's health is declining. That's all I can say. But I know he sees this as his way of making amends. Not just with you, but with the people he's hurt. I nodded, unable to find the words. The next morning, I drove to the address listed in the letter, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, I gasped. The house was charming and warm, with a white picket fence, a small garden, and a porch swing that seemed to beckon me to sit and stay a while. Emily squealed with delight as she ran inside, exploring every corner. "Mom, look, my own room," she called out, her voice echoing through the halls. I couldn't stop the tears. This wasn't just a house. It was a home, a chance to start over, to give my daughter the life she deserved. But as I stood there, soaking in the moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Why had Mr. Grant chosen me, of all people? Over the next few days, I received more visits from the lawyer, who brought additional documents for the trust fund and other formalities. Each visit only deepened my curiosity about Mr. Grant's life and the son he'd mentioned. One evening, just as I was starting to feel like my life was settling into this new reality, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the house. A tall, imposing man stepped out, his sharp suit and piercing eyes radiating authority. I recognized him immediately. Jonathan Grant, the billionaire CEO whose face graced countless magazine covers. He strode up to the porch with the confidence of someone who owned the world. "Are you Claire Taylor?" he asked, his tone clipped but polite. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can I help you?" He held up a photo of me and his father at the cafe. "You met my father. I need to know what he said to you." I hesitated. His demeanor was cold, but I could see the faintest flicker of pain in his eyes. "He didn't say much about you," I admitted, "but he seemed proud of you." Jonathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. "My father doesn't share his thoughts easily. I need to know if he mentioned anything at all about why he's been acting so strangely lately." I thought about the letter, about the man who had poured his heart into those words. "He just wanted to make things right," I said softly. "With you, and with everyone else?" Jonathan stared at me for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. Then, without another word, he turned and left. Over the next several weeks, I found myself drawn deeper into the Grant's world. I learned about the rift between father and son, the betrayals and regrets that had kept them apart. And as I pieced together their story, I realized that my own kindness had become the catalyst for their reconciliation. A week after Jonathan's visit, I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. It was Jonathan again, but this time he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was Walter Grant, looking friendlier than before, but with a warm smile on his face. "Mr. Grant," I exclaimed, surprised to see him. "Are you okay?" Walter chuckled weakly. "I've been better, my dear, but I wanted to see you again. May we come in?" I stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. Emily, curious as ever, peeked out from the kitchen and smiled shyly at Walter. He beamed at her, his face lighting up as if her innocence and joy were a balm to his soul. Once we were seated, Walter's tone turned serious. "Claire, I owe you an explanation. My son and I have had our differences, but meeting you reminded me of the importance of family, of forgiveness." Jonathan and I are trying to rebuild what we lost, and I want you to be part of that." I blinked in confusion. "Me? Why?" "Because you showed me something I had forgotten," Walter said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. That's rare in this world, Claire, and it's something Jonathan needs to see more of." Jonathan shifted uncomfortably, his usual air of confidence replaced by a quiet unease. "What my father's trying to say," he interjected, "is that we'd like to help you, but this isn't just about charity. My father believes you have a role to play in helping him leave behind a legacy." Walter reached for a small box in his pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a pendant with an intricate design. "This belonged to my late wife," he said softly. "She believed in helping others, just as you do. I want you to wear it as a reminder that your actions have ripple effects far beyond what you can see." I was speechless, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider my offer," Walter replied. "I'd like you to oversee a foundation I'm creating, a charity to support single mothers and underprivileged children. You'll have full control, and we'll provide the resources you need to make a real difference." Tears welled up in my eyes. This was more than I ever could have imagined. "I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that." Jonathan leaned forward, his expression softening. "You're more qualified than most. My father sees something in you, and honestly, I think I do too. You've inspired him, Claire, and maybe, just maybe, you can inspire me as well." Over the following months, I threw myself into building the foundation. Walter guided me with his wisdom, and Jonathan offered his business expertise. It was a strange partnership at first, but as time passed, I began to see a different side of Jonathan, a side that cared deeply about his father and the legacy they were creating. The foundation quickly gained traction, and the stories of the women and children we helped were nothing short of inspiring. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, tragedy struck. One evening, as I was preparing a report for the foundation, my phone rang. It was Jonathan, and his voice was laced with panic. "Claire, it's my father. He's in the hospital. You need to come now." My heart dropped. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with fear. When I arrived, Jonathan met me in the lobby, his usually composed demeanor shattered. "He's asking for you," he said quietly. I entered the room to find Walter lying in bed, his breathing shallow. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Claire," he whispered, reaching for my hand. "I'm here," I said, choking back tears. "You've done so much," he said, his voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll keep going. Promise me you'll take care of my son." "I promise," I said, my voice breaking. With a faint smile, Walter closed his eyes, and the room fell silent. He was gone. Walter's death hit us all hard, but it also brought Jonathan and me closer. We leaned on each other for support, and slowly, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble. I saw the pain he carried, the guilt for the years he had spent estranged from his father, and I made it my mission to help him heal. As we worked together on the foundation, our bond deepened. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about finding solace in each other. And though I hadn't planned for it, I realized I was falling for him. Months later, the foundation was thriving, and so were we. Jonathan and I were no longer just colleagues. We were partners in every sense of the word. Emily adored him, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a family again. One evening, as we stood on the porch of my new home, Jonathan took my hand. "Claire, my father was right about you. You've changed my life in ways I didn't think were possible. I want to build a future with you. If you'll have me." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. "I'd like that," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. And as we stood there, looking out at the life we had built together, I knew that Walter's legacy wasn't just the foundation. It was the love and hope he had inspired in all of us. Just when it seemed life had settled into a beautiful rhythm, the past came knocking in a way none of us anticipated. One day, while I was reviewing the foundation's financials, an unfamiliar name appeared on one of the donation logs: Margaret Green. The donation wasn't just generous, it was enormous, enough to fund several new programs. But it came with a chilling note attached. "Claire, we need to talk. Call me." 555-0198. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stared at the note. Who was Margaret Green, and how did she know me? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a donation. It was personal. I showed the note to Jonathan that evening. His expression darkened. "This doesn't sit right with me," he admitted. "It feels off. I'll have my team look into her." But something compelled me to call. Against Jonathan's protests, I dialed the number, my hands trembling. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "Claire Taylor," the woman said, as if she'd been waiting for me. "It's been a long time. I'm sorry, but who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I think you know," she replied. "Meet me at the corner cafe tomorrow at noon." Alone. The next day, I arrived at the cafe, my stomach churning with anxiety. Margaret was already there, a striking woman in her mid-50s with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was calculated, like she already knew the upper hand was hers. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "Who are you, and what do you want?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She leaned back, studying me. "You've made quite the life for yourself, haven't you? New home, thriving foundation, a relationship with Jonathan Grant." My breath caught. "How do you know about that?" "I know everything," she said with a smirk. "Because I've been watching you, Claire. You see, Walter Grant wasn't just a kind old man. He was my former business partner." "Business partner?" I echoed, confused. Walter had never mentioned her. "Yes. We built our first company together. An empire, really. But Walter betrayed me. He cut me out when the profits started rolling in, left me with nothing. I've been waiting for the right moment to settle the score." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, my voice rising. "You," she said, leaning forward, "are part of his legacy, and I intend to destroy it." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "You can't be serious," I said, trying to mask my fear. "Oh, I'm very serious," Margaret replied, her voice venomous. "That foundation you poured your heart into? I can ruin it with a single phone call. Imagine the scandal. Fraud, embezzlement, misuse of funds. It doesn't matter if it's true. The damage would be done." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I want Walter's name erased from history," she said coldly. "And if taking you down is the way to do it, so be it." When I told Jonathan about the encounter, his reaction was swift. "She's bluffing," he said, his jaw clenched. "There's no way she can prove anything." "But what if she's not?" I countered. "The foundation can't survive a scandal like that, even if it's false." Jonathan's eyes softened as he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll fight this together. My father wouldn't want us to let someone like her destroy everything he built." Over the next few days, Jonathan's legal team worked tirelessly to uncover Margaret's intentions. Meanwhile, I focused on bolstering the foundation's transparency, ensuring every dollar was accounted for. If she wanted a fight, we were going to give her one. In the midst of the chaos, I stumbled upon something unexpected. While sorting through Walter's old documents, I found a letter addressed to Margaret. It was dated years ago, long before his health began to decline. "Margaret, I know I failed you. What I did was unforgivable, and I've lived with that guilt every day. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to make amends in person. Please know that I never intended to hurt you, and I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Walter." The letter was a window into a side of Walter I hadn't seen, a man who carried regrets but lacked the courage to face them. It gave me an idea. I arranged another meeting with Margaret, this time armed with the letter. When I handed it to her, she hesitated. Her confident demeanor faltered as she read Walter's words. "This doesn't change what he did," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "No, but it shows that he cared," I replied gently. "He wanted to make things right, even if he didn't know how. Maybe it's not too late for you to find peace." Margaret stared at the letter for a long moment before finally sighing. "You're more like him than I thought," she said. "Fine. I'll back off for now." With Margaret out of the picture, the foundation continued to thrive. But the encounter left me with a renewed sense of purpose. Walter's legacy wasn't just about the foundation or the wealth he left behind. It was about healing, forgiveness, and the power of human connection. Jonathan and I grew even closer, and Emily flourished in our new life. The scars of the past lingered, but they no longer defined us. We were building something new, something beautiful.